fire this up. All right, this is a Lunenburg Water Commissioners meeting, March 18th, 5 p.m. We are primarily here to see a presentation from Ty and Bond to present the draft master plan to the Board of Commissioners. Where this is a regular meeting, we are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Lou Sirocco with Ty and Bond. I'm here tonight with my colleague Tom Hanna in the audience, and we're going to go through just the highlights, summary of the PFAS master plan that we completed for the district. So part of this presentation, we're going to just briefly touch upon a couple of these topics. The emerging PFAS regulations, what's going on with the district's water quality, capacity and water quality of each of their supplies, review the different options available for PFAS treatment, some recommendations for PFAS treatment. We'll go through our treatment alternatives analysis, and at the end we'll have a capital costs and the recommended plan and a potential schedule, draft schedule. So PFAS in drinking water, what is it? It's an acronym. It stands for a family of chemicals, thousands and thousands of different chemicals. Recently, the US EPA has enacted a draft legislation that would establish an MCL for various individual compounds. Those are, highlights are PFOA and PFOS in the middle of the table there, establishing a 4 parts per trillion limit, which is a very low limit. Currently, Massachusetts has a limit of 20 parts per trillion, and that's for a combination of the different compounds above that number 20. So this would, so if the federal MCL gets finalized, those individual PFOS and PFOA would have individual limits of 4, which is important for the district to pay attention to. Just a brief history of what's going on in the district. It was established in 1939. Currently has 6 water supply wells, 4 of which are located at Lancaster Avenue of varying capacities, which we'll go into a little bit later on. There's the Hickory Hills well, and then the Keating well, which is their largest source. There's over 50 miles of main distribution system throughout the district, ranging in sizes and diameter of 4 inches to 16 inches. Approximately 2,500 customers. Estimated population served is around 7,100. On average, the district uses 500,000 gallons a day. That can be lower in the winters, 350,000 gallons, or during the summer's high demand periods, it can go up to 1.2 million gallons a day. The district operates under a Water Management Act permit, which establishes an average usage of 540,000 gallons per day, 0.54 million gallons. So you can go above this, but on the average for the whole year, the permit is 0.54. That can be increased, but there's a process that goes along with that, a permitting process that establishes the need and the mitigation to increase that amount. Brief overview of the different well supplies that the district operates. These are all the approved operating rates. At the bottom, you can see that the Keating is the largest capacity, followed by the Hickory Hills well. And then you've got 0.4 all the way down to 0.1, depending upon which well over at Lancaster Ave. Why is this important? Well, what you want is a system that can meet average max day demands with their largest source offline. So if Keating were to be taken offline, currently Hickory Hills is offline due to water quality concerns. It was taken offline back in 2012 due to elevated levels of manganese, and we'll talk more about its water quality in a couple slides from here. So if Keating were to go offline for any reason, that limits you to Lancaster Ave to supply the whole district. Now individually you add them all together, it can handle average day demand, but wells 1 and 4, which have the red arrows next to them, were highlighted in that they really wouldn't be able to sustain those pumping rates for much more than a couple of days. So that further limits the available amount of water that the district would have. So if Keating were to go offline in a peak summer demand scenario for a prolonged period of time, more than 2 or 3 days, you wouldn't be able to keep up with capacity. Or demand, sorry. So just in summary, 1.44 million gallons a day from Keating, so that, Keating can satisfy all of the district's demands. However, Lancaster has limited capacity, which goes down to 0.47. It cannot operate after a couple of days. So I guess what this really is trying to tell us is that it really highlights the need for redundancy and resiliency in the system that Hickory Hills can help provide. So if Keating were to go offline, they'd be in much better, the district would be in much better shape, sharing the burden of all demands between Lancaster and the Hickory well. Touching briefly on the water quality that has been sampled at each of the sources. I mentioned that 4 parts per trillion new MCL that the EPA has drafted. It has not finalized yet, but it has been published in a draft form. We don't know when it will be finalized. They keep pushing the date off, so we'll stay tuned for that. But there has been sampling that show the PFOA from Lancaster Ave is above that MCL, circled in red. Hickory Hills well, it's currently above the Massachusetts regulations of 20 parts per trillion. So to bring that well online, it would require treatment for PFAS. In addition, both PFAS and PFOA individually are over the proposed EPA MCL 4. And finally, at the Keating site, similar to Lancaster, it is above the EPA MCL for PFOA. So that is, so if these draft regulations become final, it's going to impact all of the district sources. So we took a look at what are the different treatment options that are available to the district for removing PFAS from their water. Granular activated carbon, GAC, and anion exchange are the most prevalent and widely used out there right now. They're both effective, they're both in use, they're both approved by Mass DEP and in operation in Mass. There are pros and cons to the different types of media. GAC in general can handle maybe the longer chain compounds a little bit better than say the short chain, which the ion exchange can shine on that. But they both have pros and cons, and depends on the water quality, and we typically run pilots to determine whether or not it's going to be the right type of media for that water. Some less widespread options available are membrane filtration. You can go to a reverse osmosis system. It's highly effective in removing them. However, it is very high costs, very high O&M, it's very energy intensive, and at the end of the day, you have a concentrated brine, liquid brine waste that is where the PFAS has been concentrated that requires treatment. So typically to do that, they run it through a GAC filter. So you're not really getting away from GAC by going to membrane filtration. Foam fractionation, another emerging technology. Basically, they inject air into a water body, and the bubbles float the PFAS to the top, and they're able to concentrate and remove it. However, this is probably more widely used on waters that have high concentrations of PFAS. So the low levels that the district have are not quite that applicable to that type of technology. And then there are novel absorbents. So basically medias that act a lot like GAC or IX that are emerging every day. They're all trying to create the latest and greatest medias that could outperform GAC and IX. We're currently piloting one at the Hickory Well site called Fluorabsorb, and we're going to wait to see how well it performs. The benefit of going the novel absorbent is it might be a little bit more expensive than GAC, but less expensive than IX. Will hopefully last longer. So you have to see how it performs and run out the economics for the individual site. The other thing that's attractive about Fluorabsorb itself is it doesn't really mind the presence of chlorine like IX. IX cannot typically handle any levels of chlorine going to the media. So from that perspective, it gives us a wider range of treatment options. The master plan also goes into, well, what is the alternative to treating PFAS? We looked at, well, what happens if you continue without treatment? Right now, there's currently, without new PFAS regulations, there currently exists a capacity concern. The district doesn't have the redundancy it needs with its largest source offline. However, if PFAS regulations are finalized, then all of the district sources are impacted. So we don't really see this as a feasible option. You could purchase water from somebody else. The district has looked at purchasing water from their interconnection. This was done when evaluating whether or not to proceed with the acquisition of the Keating supply. That was reviewed, the cost analysis completed. It was determined to be more expensive than going with their own source, as well as it puts the control of how much you get charged water completely out of your hands. So you're kind of at the mercy of the community that's selling you the water. So you really don't have control over that. So that wasn't a very desirable option as well. To develop a new source, we develop new sources from time to time. However, this is a very long process. The permitting is extensive, and it requires the district to own the property, control what impacts the water supply. In addition, with how widespread PFAS presence is in the environment and the low levels that are proposed, it is quite likely that even a new source would have levels that are at the same or more than Lancaster and Keating. So not really a desirable option, and not really feasible in the short term either. This is it will take 5+ years depending upon the complexity of the source. 5 would be an aggressive schedule. So looking at each source in terms of PFAS recommendations, Lancaster will need treatment if the EPA MCL is finalized. There are low levels of iron and manganese in the water at Lancaster, and we would recommend that those be addressed to remove iron and manganese prior to PFAS treatment. In most cases, pilot testing has shown that without removal of these, it reduces the life expectancy of your PFAS treatment media, which is your most expensive media that you're going to have to replace periodically, and you want to prolong its life as long as possible. So it's recommended that the iron and manganese is addressed. Very similar story at Hickory Hills Well. Except that it's currently over the Massachusetts MCL. It's also got high manganese, which is above the health advisory that Mass has for it. So it would require iron manganese removal prior to PFAS treatment as well. Currently, pilot testing is ongoing for iron, manganese, and PFAS at the Hickory Well. The Keating Well site, similar to Lancaster, it would need PFAS treatment under the proposed MCL. There is high hardness at the Keating Wells in addition, so we would be looking at that in the pilot study too, to address the high hardness, to make sure that doesn't both impact the PFAS treatments as well as address the ongoing maintenance issues that is currently causing the district. So establishing what sites need treatment, we took a look at, well, how would we address treatment for the whole district in an organized manner. So we looked at it a couple different ways. We looked at a fully decentralized treatment option, which basically means you put a new treatment system at each well. So we took a look at what that would look like. And at the same time, it maintains the high system, it would maintain a good resiliency, but it would be the highest capital cost and highest O&M cost as you'd be maintaining and operating 3 separate treatment plants. We looked at the centralized treatment, so basically treating all of the district sources in one location. So that has the potential to be the lowest capital costs and O&M costs. However, it requires an extensive amount of raw water transmission main, and it's also the least resilient option. If something were to happen to that treatment plant, then the district has no water available for the whole system. So not very resilient, not very, it's going in the wrong way in terms of resiliency and redundancy. And it has the potential to be the most complex because we're blending 3 different sources, so we need to address the water quality needs of all 3 different sources in one location. So that could mean a more complex treatment plant. So then we looked at an approach that was kind of in between these two, where we'd have 2 treatment plants, one that would treat the water from 2 wells and one that would stay decentralized. So to do that, we would need just under 4 miles of transmission main to get one of these sources to the other site. And it would also lower capital costs and O&M costs when you compare it to the, building 3 different treatment plants at 3 different sites. So what does it look like at Lancaster Avenue? We overlaid where we might place a treatment plant at Lancaster Avenue. At this scale, it might be tough to see on the screen, but this is Lancaster Avenue. All of those magenta circles are the zone 1s for each of the wells. So we take a look at, well, we don't want to put certain things in the zone 1. We're not allowed to put certain things in the zone 1. We also take a look at wetlands. Where are the wetlands? Where are the flood zones? So that limits us to where we want to put a treatment plant, because the treatment plant has certain building systems that require different things. Recently, the Massachusetts enacted a new plumbing code that requires bathrooms and even unmanned pumping facilities. So that was a recent addition in December that we have to contend with. So we want to make sure that we're in a location where, okay, we had to put a septic system in, is there land available? So the, brownish blob on the lower right is an area where it's outside the zone 1s, it's outside the wetlands, it's out of the floodplain. So there is some land available where if we needed to put in a septic system, the land is available there. We're looking at roughly a 7,000 square foot building that, in terms of developing costs for this type of facility. And we're also looking for lay down next to the building. So when you have delivery of, say, if you go GAC carbon, you need temporary frac tanks there so that when you swap out the media, you take the old ones out, put in a frac tank, haul off site. New media shows up in a frac tank, it's pumped into the facility, so you need some room to move around and swap the media out. Over at the Hickory Hill site, we took the same approach. We took a look at it. So we looked at what it would look like. So it's another 7,000 square foot building. The gray area is kind of an L shape where we took the approach of, well, if we could reuse some of the existing building, this is the footprint it would take up. Still the same footprint, so if we had an addition onto it, roughly that's as small as we could potentially make it. It also needs the frac tank laydown area, and we showed that we probably need a variance or need to put in like a tight tank for the bathroom. So we could always go for a variance on that. So when we took a look at that, it seemed like that was going to be very tight to fit all that down there. So that was one option over at Hickory Hills. We took a look at the second option where there appeared to be some underdeveloped land that wasn't too far away from the site. So you could pump the raw water up over to the parcel on the middle left. And that's all the same size, where you'd have a 7,000 square foot building, and you're up out of the flood zone, out of wetlands, out of zone 1. So you'd have all those available to you. But it would require the acquisition of some land to purchase if that was available to make that happen. Also challenging. Over at Keating, similarly, we have the zone 1 there. It's just a single well out back. And for this treatment plant, we're not looking at the need for backwashing since we're not treating iron and manganese here. So we don't really need as much space for it. We do need to capture the brine from the softening system that we might have to use to soften the water. But aside from that, still we're looking at roughly a 7,000 square foot building, but different equipment that would go along with this one. We try to reuse a lot of the existing infrastructure there, where the existing pump station could still act as the final pumping station out to the distribution system. So we just kind of intercept flow between the existing well and the existing pump station, treat it, and then it would go out to the system. So when we started looking at the option of centralizing 2 of these treatment plants, we looked at a couple different things that would make our lives either more difficult or less difficult. And the 2 main things are water quality, and then there's a few logistical things. So under water quality, we're looking at, well, you want those 2 sources to have similar water quality, so that the treatment system that you'd use for both wells is as similar as possible. Lancaster Avenue and Hickory Hills well are the most similar when it comes to iron, manganese, and PFAS. Keating is the most dissimilar. It has no iron and manganese, so blending it with another source that needs iron and manganese treatment is not an efficient process. You'd probably want to keep it separate. It adds complexity to what you would do to treat any of those other 2 that were to blend with Keating. And the high hardness would still have to be addressed, and that's a unique thing to Keating. Then there were logistical considerations. Location. Hickory Hills site was not really considered as a centralized site to centralize a treatment plant, as it had the most issues and least available area. So we took a look at Lancaster Avenue and Keating, which seemed to be both had plenty of room to put a centralized plant. And then we took a look at raw water transmission mains, and we saw that it was very similar distances from Hickory to Lancaster as it was from Keating to Lancaster. So there wasn't a big difference there either. So from a water quality and location perspective, it really seemed like Lancaster and Hickory had similar water quality and not a huge difference in transmission main. Which this kind of summarizes that there. So the recommendation is to combine Lancaster and Hickory. And the proposed site is at Lancaster Ave. It's got more space available to it. So when we started looking at that, how do we refine how you get between Hickory and Lancaster? And there's a couple of different routes you could take through town to get there. One is the shortest distance, just travel over the roads through the shortest distance possible. The other option just takes an alternate route. It is longer, but it provides the opportunity that while you're at it, maybe you loop part of the system to help with some water quality and circulation as you go. You could even expand to new customers. So what does the centralized treatment plant look like over at Lancaster Ave? It looks very similar to the other figure that I've shown you, except we're showing that the building is roughly 12,000 square feet, accounting for larger filters and additional tankage that we required when you're treating roughly double the flow. And then this is option one for the transmission main, which it's challenging to see, but in yellow, we highlight the road between Hickory and Lancaster. That is the shortest distance there, approximately 3.82 miles. There's a couple of culverts that would need to be crossed, both on Lancaster Ave. The one in the middle of the figure seems pretty straightforward. You could go over it. The one closer to Lancaster Ave would probably be accomplished with a directional drill to avoid the low clearance that currently exists above the culvert. Option two takes the other route through town, and what this does, it allows the district the opportunity to loop the system between a couple of dead ends, long dead ends. So there's roughly 6,400 linear feet of this route that would where you could install a couple of pipes so that you would loop the system. So it adds a significant amount of pipe to the project. It is a consideration because it does drive up the costs quite a bit. So in the end, what the two treatment option really looks like is one treatment at Lancaster Avenue that treats both Lancaster and Hickory, and then one at Keating Well that treats just Keating. And the reasons became it's less expensive to construct than a treatment system at each individual site. It's more resilient and redundant than just a single centralized treatment plant. We don't have to acquire any land to do this alternative. It does help address the limited space concerns over at Hickory Hills Well site. And on top of that, it would eliminate chemical deliveries to Hickory Well. You wouldn't need to do those anymore. It will also limit the construction activities down at the limited space you have down at the Hickory Hills site. They would be limited to basically a raw water transmission main to get the water to the Lancaster Ave site. You'd still probably want to do a couple of pump station exterior improvements while you're at it, but all in all, very, very minor. This table summarizes some of the ongoing efforts and planned efforts and some budgeting numbers for the option. So at the top we have ongoing piloting at Hickory Hills, so that's ongoing. After that, we would need to do piloting efforts at Lancaster Ave and Keating, so those are both planned. And then for the combined treatment plant, there is a budget figure that we've included, which includes the transmission main across town. So total budget all in would be just over $32 million for that option. The Keating plant, off and by itself, would be just over $12 million. So we recognize these are significant costs, which is why I think the district was wise in their application to the DEP SRF program for these types of projects. They provide both 0% financing as well as the ability for to gain some principal forgiveness. So it really helps with the financing of these. In terms of scheduling, there's a lot of dates that you got to pay attention to when it comes to SRF financing. They usually come in June and October. Those are the, and then they throw a curveball in you in August when you need to apply for more funding. But the next deadline that's up there for the district is to appropriate, take a vote to agree to borrow the funding for the treatment plant that's currently on the draft IUP for the Hickory site. After that, we would need to apply for additional funding for Keating to get the ball rolling there this summer in August. Hopping back to the Lancaster Ave, Keating, Hickory site treatment process. If funding is approved, the next step is a loan application in October of this year. And then after that, it's back to June, where you have to have a contractor under contract. Why is that important? For the SRF program, without their express written consent, if you don't have a contractor under contract by that June 30th deadline, you are at risk of losing principal forgiveness on your loan. So that's why that date's important. And if for whatever reason, you just need to be in touch with them to make sure that you don't lose that option. And then these types of plants, right now, we're given schedules of at least 2 years. They used to be built in 1 year. Now, with all the delays in the supply chain and just everything, just takes much longer. So these take around 2 years to be built once they break ground. All those dates were just put into a graphical display on this one for folks who can. And I broke it up by project so that it was a little bit more easy to follow along. That's the end of the presentation, but I'd be happy to take questions from anything that was discussed along the way.
I'll go first. Sure, I've got a couple of notes here. Just for the people that are watching at home, they may not understand what a raw water transmission main is. Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. So what we call raw water is water that is fully untreated. It's what you pump directly out of the ground. So in our case, what we'd be looking to do is install a new pipe that conveys the untreated raw water from Hickory across town to the Lancaster site into our proposed treatment plant, where it will be treated and then distributed to the distribution system like it's currently done. So you might see, if that goes forward, a crew installing a pipeline that no one connects to.
Correct.
No height, no height.
And you wouldn't necessarily connect the same number of hydrants that you would a traditional distribution main, but you might connect a few hydrants for flushing purposes, but these would be painted probably black with like "do not use" or stuff like that on them.
Okay, thank you. Just for the layman's term there.
Why couldn't you use one of those hydrants in an emergency, like a fire or something?
And that you probably could.
You could, as long as you had a good degree of coordination with the fire department. They knew or understood what that water, where it was coming from. Like if you're putting out a barn fire, and
Right.
but you'd have to coordinate with the district because they have to turn the well on.
I think
Oh, okay.
to, for what we're doing right now, if we went with option one, there's already hydrants along the way there. I don't see,
Right.
You talk about the PFAS regulations, the MCL, which I'm unaware what that term is. And, this has come up quite a bit. This is a draft for the new lower regulations. Do we have any more information on that, when that would go into effect, if it will go into effect? These are, I think, some of the questions that people might have.
Sure. MCL stands for maximum contaminant level.
Okay?
So for all the different things that are regulated in water, the EPA sets an MCL for each thing that it's concerned about. And it's the job of the state and the water supplier to sample and regularly to show that they're below these levels, or else they need to, take that source offline. The draft was published last year. They had a schedule to release the final MC at the end of last year. We keep, every month that goes by, we keep hearing, oh no, it's been delayed a month or so.
Okay.
So it's
We
it
don't
gets
really know,
finalized
but
when it gets
it's-
finalized, but yeah.
But the current EPA level is already at 0.4, correct?
So
Recommended level.
the EPA, the only thing that has been issued by EPA are the draft MCLs, which are not enforceable yet. There's just letting the public know this
Sure.
is what we're thinking is coming. And then the other thing that they've published are health advisories, which those are, not to confuse matters, different numbers that they're recommending you stay below, but they're not enforceable either.
I got a couple more.
You're asking something one time, after you're gonna say this.
Well, I guess just, in numbers on one of the slides here, when it shows our well capacities, we know the Keating's is 1.44, and I've added up the others, and I'm just making sure I'm right, that's 1.7. So if you combine the other 4 wells at Hickory Hills, 4 wells at Lancaster and the 1 Hickory Hills, that is at 1.7, which is greater than the Keating's well, just for numbers' sake here. When we looked at some of the proposed, when you have the maps up there, proposed building sites, I did see that, like, on the Hickory Hills, that building currently is in the zone 1.
Yes.
And I believe the same thing at the Keating's well.
Yes.
Well, well, not Lancaster Ave.
The building is on.
The building is
The building
on.
where the well
The
pump
septic
is.
is on.
Okay, so is that okay to have a building in the
Yes.
zone 1?
Things that are directly related to the water supply itself
Copy.
are allowed in there, with exception
A
of,
leach field. Copy.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay,
Um,
those are my questions.
There was a 7,000 square foot building
Mm,
and a 12,000 square foot building.
yes.
Now, were those two buildings gonna be at capacity size for what you wanna do?
Like, yeah.
Yeah, so we're estimating that, we could treat each of these individual sources within 7,000 square feet. When we combine them, we're estimating we'll need to expand that to 12,000. So those numbers are rough estimates for the footprint of the building that you would need under that scenario.
That's what I was thinking about, what if we won't be here, but someday, 20 or 30 years from now, there's a few more wells that are put online, and the building's gonna be big enough to,
So we have built buildings that are, have the ability to increase capacity. This can be done in a couple of different ways. Sometimes you leave a space for another filter. How often do we end up putting another filter in there? It doesn't happen all that often, but what we do is we design the building and we reserve area on site so that the building can be expanded in the future if needed, which is probably a more likely scenario. And easier to install filter on a new addition as opposed to in an existing building.
I think the numbers we're looking at right now, we're probably not looking to do anything.
Yeah, we're not looking to do any
I
plan for extra at this
Uh,
point.
You have the numbers for combining Hickory Hills and Lancaster Ave, and it came out to that 32 million. But that was using the shorter as
Correct.
route, the 3.2 miles. I'm just
3.8.
3.8.
Yep.
Do you happen to have did you do the calculations for doing it for that option 2 of running it?
We did run the numbers, it's a little over 2.1 or 2.2 million more.
Okay, to go the other way.
Yeah.
Okay. No problem.
either way, it's a lot of money.
Oh my God.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about, we currently have the SRF, we're approved for SRF funding, the 0% with principal forgiveness, as long as we meet certain deadlines. How does that relate to now, we're thinking, that, I think we were thinking that number was based on an isolated
Correct.
plant. How do we now look at that and incorporate the future of Lancaster Ave? What does that do to that number?
So we reached out to our contacts at the SRF program to ask that exact question. Because, we're going through this analysis and we're like, oh geez, the plan seems like it's changing, so let's call them and find out how we approach this. And the feedback we got from them was as soon as the the IUP is final, which I'm hearing maybe by the end of March, we'll see, but they have schedules that, sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. It should be before June, because everyone needs to furnish their appropriation by then. But yeah, no, they said, once it's been finalized, send a letter to them, letting them know this is what the ask is. And they do set aside contingency funds for these situations when things change.
Meaning we could asked for more money
Correct.
on top of that, okay, because we originally budgeted that.
Still get the 0%.
Because we have a couple of projects in your vote for different reasons, and they just requested a letter, just summarizing what the ask is, because it is a significant change. In some cases, it's not as significant a
Sure.
change, but it was met with send a letter, and we will see what we can do.
So I'm assuming that, you know, if we go through this master plan, we all come up with the best scenario, we vote on it. Then in return, we would basically send that back and be like, okay, we've changed it from doing one to, if we go that road
Yeah.
and combining these together, and they say, okay. And at that point, is it a request for us? I mean, do we request a new number?
So what we would do is we would put that request in writing to them. Let's just say they have the funds available to fulfill that request.
Sure.
What happens anyway is, for everyone on the program, for the first year, you only get 15 million,
Yeah.
regardless of the size of your project.
Mhm.
So then you become a carryover project. So really what we're asking for them is for you to become a carryover project with this amount of carryover. So if they say yes to that,
Mhm.
the only thing they're gonna wanna see from you is a vote that shows that you agreed to borrow that much.
Okay. Now, currently, when we did get this SRF funding, I saw that long list and we made the cut, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Do we hold our place in line there while we do this, or do we go back to the beginning?
Yeah, you stay on the list. You don't change, really. That's more of just a ranking system to establish who gets funded that year.
Right.
And either you make it or you don't.
Yeah.
So once it's final, then
Okay.
you're
There's
on.
no chance of basically losing the spot by re-engaging with this, I guess is what I'm asking.
No.
Okay.
But there are deadlines that we need to meet in order to accept this funding.
Because you're not changing the original intent of the application, which was to treat the Hickory Hills well. That's not changing.
Correct.
It's just the location of the concept of where we thought we were gonna build the plant in the first place is changing, and now we're adding additional source, which will look favorably upon by DEP.
Sure.
So the intent was because the Hickory Hills well is above the allowable MCL right now, right?
Well, because Hickory is above the MCL right now, you scored very high and you got on the list.
Okay. So hypothetically, some people may say, well, you gotta put a transmission main in, you have to do a lot. Why don't we just use that SRF funding and just do Lancaster Ave?
Unfortunately, if they were to look at the application on the lens of just Lancaster Ave, it's not currently over the MCL, so you would then lose points and fall off the list.
Right, okay. So, my point being is it's gotta kind of incorporate both those sites and,
Yeah.
and the work that you did showing that the water quality is similar, so obviously similar treatment is good. And if you can treat two sites with one spot, I think that's a great idea.
So we must kind of got lucky the way this worked out.
Well, with the numbers we're talking.
Yeah, I know.
There's no luck. But we do the best we can with what we got, I guess.
You mentioned one thing, I can't remember exactly what it was. There was a system that pumps air into the
Mhm.
water, brings the PFAS to the top.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to the top, do you see it? Or is it a floating chemical or?
I believe it creates like foamy bubbles, and then that's just scraped off the top.
But it
into,
shows itself after the air bubbles blow up.
I haven't seen it myself, but that's my understanding, yes.
So you mentioned that was for higher, people with much higher levels of PFAS in the
Right.
water. It's more of a,
Right, when people have like milligrams per liter, they might want to address it with that first to knock it down a little bit. But just being a whisker above the MCL, it's not a very efficient process.
great. Fran, do you have any?
Yeah. So when these sites are being constructed, will they be offline for any period of time?
So, I think to build the building, say like take Lancaster. You build the building, nothing needs to go offline while you're building that building. You'll shut down a portion of the site here and there when you're tying in the mains and rerouting stuff. But I feel like all you would need to do is shut down for a little while,
Short term.
put in the right valving, so that when the treatment plant is ready, it's a matter of changing the valve.
Okay, so, in the future, when these new regulations do take effect, a lot more municipalities are gonna be applying for this SRF funding. Is it guaranteed we're gonna get funding for Keating's well, or if something happened with this permit, to tie Lancaster with Hickory Hills, are we guaranteed to get funding for those?
I don't think so.
I
wanna
would not
say-
guarantee anything.
This year had PFAS projects that didn't get funded, and I think they look at it case by case in terms of, well, how much PFAS do you have versus somebody else, and how big of an impact is it to you versus somebody else? At least I hope that's what they do.
So, there's just, a comment on the new source that you mentioned as an option. If we went the new source route, from what I understand, there is no available SRF funding for that new source.
No.
So whatever we did would be at a bond rate, which we call today was 4.25% for a 30-year term. So you'd have the full loan, interest rate plus no principal forgiveness, and which would apply not only for the construction of the site, the water main to get to the site, and the full PFAS treatment, which everybody's pretty confident we would need anyway. So the new source is even more expensive than just, finding a site, which is not very easy. I mean, we have found some sites, but they're all on Lake Shirley, so.
Right, it could take a very long time just to get to where you are with your other sources.
So then on the Hickory Hills well, I know there was always concerns of the lake levels. Can we add, as part of this facility, that we do a permanent lake level monitoring system and tie it into the SCADA? We'll make it active for everybody to see. They want to see, they can see the lake level, and we can show the pump run times, so people can look on, hey, the pump ran last night.
Yep.
And here's the lake levels before and after. So.
Yeah, that building can stay there. It's gonna need to be there to house the current electrical gear for the well pump itself. You could easily put a level transducer on the lake, continuously monitor the lake level, have that tied into SCADA, and you can get as many data points as you want.
If we ended up going with the option of putting the treatment plant at Lancaster Ave, what impacts, if any, would be at the current Hickory Hills well site, building, et cetera?
I mean, once that goes online, there really will be very little need to go down to that site, other than to just double check and make sure that the pump is okay. But there'd be no more chemical deliveries down there, no more chemical stored down there, and they would all be over at Lancaster Ave.
So it would just be, not even business as usual, it would just be.
You may not even have to go to it on a daily
Right.
basis.
Right.
Because you could do a lot of the monitoring from
The SCADA system.
from the SCADA system, but then everything else is in the building.
Right, since there's no chemicals there, I don't believe there's any DEP requirement for you to visit the site every single day.
Right. Okay. But naturally, we still would need to run a new main out of there direct, whether.
Right.
What's the pressure of a transmission main comparable to our existing pressure?
We're gonna try to design that as low pressure as possible. So, it'll be enough, just to get there and get to the tank we need to get to. So it'll be lower pressure than your distribution.
Yeah.
That'll be
Probably makes a lot of
that'd be a
sense.
fire thing, you're dealing with
Yeah.
two different pressures and so.
Yeah, because
forth.
you literally just
Water
need
is
to pump
there,
from A to B now, and not worry
Right.
about getting up and.
The operating pressure of these treatment plants is significantly lower, so you're we're talking like, probably most likely in the 50-pound range,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah.
Just to get through the filters, and then they get pumped out into the distribution system. So the raw water transmission mains will have significantly lower pressure than what's in the rest of the system.
And when the pump's not running, basically no pressure.
Sure.
So on the good side, so that means it would probably, because it's a 75 horsepower motor at Hickory Hills now, so we could probably change that to a lower horsepower maybe.
Yeah,
Because
when
that'd
you,
save quite a bit on electricity.
Yeah.
costs.
when the motor goes, you can go
Sure.
down in horsepower.
And actually, that would apply for all the Lancaster Ave wells.
Yep.
Well, so if we, I'm kinda getting ahead of ourselves here, but if we did, you know, if we ended up going this route, we pump it to Lancaster Ave, to the treatment facility, and after it gets treated, there'll be, I guess, another pump
It pumps it
pumping
up
into the system,
Yes,
Yep.
higher pressure pump.
higher pressure pump. But that'll all get redone, because
Yep.
those two would now be blended, mixed together,
Yeah.
and be basically one pump.
It saves you money if you can keep your filters at lower pressure, because the higher pressure rating your filters are, the more expensive your
Sure.
filters become.
Now, this, we're trying to figure out a lot of stuff here. This $34 million that came up, is that talking about the complete system, the two treatment plants, the water mains, the feed lines, all the lines, every completed deal? I know it's hard to say, but I'm just trying to figure the 12 or 15.
Well, for the first project is a $32 million budget for the transmission main and the combined treatment.
Yeah, that's for the
Yes,
combined.
so that's,
yeah.
that number is treatment of Hickory Hills, treatment of Lancaster Ave,
Building
and the
at-
transmission
yeah,
main.
Building at Lancaster Ave, and one
Yeah, it's not,
transmission.
yeah, it's not gonna be any treatment plant at Hickory Hills, it's
No.
gonna be done
Right,
in
yeah,
Lancaster.
right.
So
That's
there's a
what-
main coming
yeah.
from Hickory Hills to Lancaster Avenue.
Yep. And then
Yep.
the treatment
Feed
plants
line,
there.
yeah,
Yep.
okay.
And if we go option 2, add 2.2 million, if we wanna shoot it down and.
Yeah, we'd have to
That's
talk
something to
about
talk
that, because
about.
that's.
I think it's a less traveled roadway,
It's-
but
Right.
it is
I mean,
longer.
let's just
So,
focus on
just to
this.
go over, option one goes up and out of the Woodlands, crosses Northfield Road, goes Turkey Hill Road to Main Street. Main Street, then crossing to Lancaster Ave and down Lancaster Ave. The option that was more expensive would require putting in additional transmission main along with.
Go down 2A, Arbor.
Would go
tie back
2A,
into-
and the loop that we would be connecting, correct me if I'm wrong, Fran, would be Mass Ave. Does it go Arbor Street to Pine?
Yes, it does.
So it would be Pine at Arbor all the way to Page,
The
Right.
Page to
And
to
Reservoir.
Reservoir. And the main again is at Reservoir and Page,
Correct.
so.
Which
that-
means we could backfeed
It-
Hickory Hills, for years, I mean, obviously we replace it.
It gives you options to backfeed those areas, and I believe you mentioned water quality, having more circulation in the system is better for water quality.
It would've been great if it was already done, because trying to do that water main is tough.
Yeah.
With the temporary water lines.
Yep. Okay, do we have, are we good from?
I'm good.
Board? Do we have any comments or questions from the public? Okay, I'd like to thank you, this was fully comprehensive and
Yes.
covered a lot of bases, and I think you did an excellent job with this.
I think you also did a very good job in layman's terms of laying this out. I mean, well, I'm sure there's a lot more fine details in here that, but this is very, very.
It's a good, very good overview.
Very good presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, if we don't have anything else, and there's no other questions, we can motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.